Welcome to the Capital Stack Show, Real Estate Syndications and Funds.
Welcome back to the Capital Stack Show, Real Estate Syndication and Funds with Shams Merchant. Shams is a commercial real estate private equity attorney who represents syndicators, sponsors, and real estate funds nationwide, helping structure deals, raise capital, and stay compliant with security laws. I'm Leanne Lyon, and today we are talking about how real estate funds work and when they actually make more sense to start one instead of doing individual syndications. Hello, Shams. Great to see you.
Great to be back, Leanne. Thank you for having me.
So, Shams, how does a real estate fund work compared to a single syndication?
This is one of the most common questions that I get as a syndication and fund formation attorney. So, very simply put, a real estate syndication is actually a fund, but it's a single asset fund, and that's why we call it a syndication. So that's one misnomer that people have is they think a syndication is actually something completely separate from a real estate fund, but a syndication is a real estate fund. I want to make sure that that is on the record so everybody knows that a syndication is a real estate fund. It is just a single asset fund. It can be a multi-asset fund as well if those assets are pre-identified and are part of that one offering. But typically, when people refer to syndication, they're talking about one asset. A fund, on the flip side, is a vehicle that buys multiple assets. And so the biggest difference with the way the fund works is that instead of raising capital for one deal, a sponsor, a real estate operator, a GP can go out and raise capital to do multiple deals over the course of a set period of time, which is typical for a closed-ended fund vehicle, and that's the most common structure used for real estate private equity. And at a very basic sense, the fund vehicle lets you go buy assets that are not pre-identified. So essentially, you're raising capital to go buy potentially a certain type of asset, but you don't know which actual project you're buying. That's the main difference from a fund than a syndication. A syndication, you can point to the building, you could point to the project and say, this is what I'm raising capital for. This is what we're investing money in. With the fund, you're not saying that. What you're saying is, I'm going to raise capital to go buy these types of projects. I don't know which ones exactly I'm going to buy just yet. I'm going to go find great deals, but I haven't identified them just yet. But give me money to go and buy great projects and to get a return for you. That's a fund.
So, how does raising capital for a fund differ from raising capital for a specific deal?
It's very different. So for a fund, because typically investors don't know what they're actually investing in, right? They know that you have a set thesis, that you're going to be buying a certain type of investment property or doing a certain type of project within the fund's thesis with some discretion, right? Um, and so the capital raising conversation is very different because you can't point to a building and say, "Hey, I'm raising, X amount of equity to go buy this deal, and I want to raise X amount of capital from you to go and put it into this project." Instead, you're saying, "You're going to give me an X amount of money, and I'm going to go buy an X amount of projects. Could be two, three, four, five, however many I can buy with the proceeds of the fund, and you're going to get an aggregated return on those assets. You're not going to get the return from one deal. You're going to get a return from all the deals averaged out, right?" And that's why the capital raising conversation is so different because, um, it's different and it's harder because you can't point to a specific deal. What you can point to is your prior track record, and you can point to your advantage in the market of why you think you're going to be able to buy these deals and make a lot of money for these investors.
So, from a sponsor's perspective, what are the main advantages of using a fund instead of doing individual syndications?
Yeah, the biggest reason a sponsor would raise a fund versus syndication is because a fund is essentially this, once it's raised, it's this piggy bank that you can essentially tap into to go buy great deals that you find in the market without having to be handcuffed in raising capital when you find a great deal. So the issue with syndications is, right, the one of the bigger issues is when syndicators find great deals, they have to then go raise capital for those deals. So not only are you focused on doing the deal, you're also focused on raising capital. You're doing a bunch of things at once, and you have a short time frame to go raise that capital. And sometimes you can't hit that time frame because you're scrambling to find investors, to find people that want to buy, invest in that particular type of deal. With a fund, you generally eliminate those problems because you've already raised the capital, right? And so all you're doing then is just calling the capital from those investors. You're making a capital call, which in a fund is a good thing, because you're saying, now I need X amount of capital to go buy this deal, but that capital has already been um, allocated to the fund. It's already been subscribed. And so you have access to it. And it's kind of like a piggy bank where you go and you take that capital and you can then go buy the deal. Now you're not stuck trying to scramble to raise investors last minute or within 30 days or 60 days. You can make a competitive offer on that project, on that acquisition, because you already know you have mostly all the money, if not all of it, to go and buy that deal.
So funds sound fairly appealing. So what are the biggest challenges that sponsors run into once they start operating a fund?
Yeah, it's the first thing that we talked about, which is capital raising. Much harder to do with the fund because you can't point to a particular property. One way to solve this is by what we call seeding the fund with an asset. So you could create a fund and then also in that fund identify the first project that you're going to do with that fund. It's called seeding the fund because essentially investors know that, well, at least I know one project you're going to be buying with my money, right? It's going to be this building you've identified. I don't know what the other ones are going to be, but I know at least I know the type of project you're going to buy because you've already identified one of those projects. It's very helpful from a capital raising standpoint because now investors are not completely blind to the fund, right? Which is why we call these funds blind pool discretionary funds. And we call them blind because investors are blind to the deals. But if you can reduce some of that, I guess, blindness by seeding the fund with a deal, it'll help you raise capital because you can at least point to one of the projects you're going to be buying in that fund over the course of its lifetime. But that's one of the bigger challenges is the capital raising side of things.
So whether or not they seed the fund, what typically needs to be in place before somebody is actually ready to launch a fund?
Yeah, the first thing is the correct legal structure, which, I help set up for clients, obviously. That's why we're doing this show. um, and so that's the biggest thing is the fund legal structure is a little bit more complicated than a syndication, because it again is going to be used for multiple properties over a longer lifetime. And so there's more nuances there as far as how capital is contributed to the fund, how capital is called, what happens if someone doesn't fund the capital that they subscribe to, that they committed, right? What are the penalties there? And so there's a bunch of different things, right, that are in a fund that you don't typically get in a syndication. So the structuring is a bit more complicated. Um, but the legal structuring has to be in place, right? Then the next thing is having the right systems and the right other partners in place to help administer the fund. And one of those partners is typically a fund administrator. So there's a lot of companies out there that provide fund admin services, and fund admin is something I recommend to funds that are going to be raising more than say $15 million, right? Um, I recommend it for all funds, but sometimes it doesn't make cost. It's not cost efficient to have one for a smaller fund vehicle. But typically most funds will have a fund administration that helps them with managing the money moving in and out of the vehicle, and doing net asset value calculations and a bunch of other things that you have to do in a fund. And so those are some things to think about to have in place before you're actually ready to go to the market to start raising capital. And then obviously, like we've mentioned on prior shows, having good systems in place, and good teams, like legal teams in place to monitor ongoing compliance with the fund that you don't have to deal with the syndication.
So you mentioned that there's a timeline. There's a start, there's an end to funds, to syndications. For somebody new here, how long can those timelines be?
I guess is the question like the timeline from deciding this to start a fund and then when they'll have the first amount of potential capital contributed to that fund vehicle?
Or when the fund will actually just expire, it'll be done.
So timelines work really differently in a fund than in a syndication. So it's a great question because, for example, in a fund, you actually have two timelines versus a syndication. In syndication, there's not really a timeline to raise capital because it's all happening at once. As the capital is raised and once it's fully there, it's being deployed into a deal, right? It's being used right then and there.
Right.
Um, the fund doesn't work that way because the fund has not identified a deal yet that it's going to buy, or maybe it has, but it's going to be buying a lot of deals potentially. So in a fund, what we typically call we have two periods. The first one's essentially what we call like a capital raising period, and then we have a deployment period. The capital raising period is to go and raise capital for the fund. Then what we have is a deployment period. This is actually a set amount of time that the sponsor has to go deploy that capital. That's actually one of the disadvantages of a fund because it puts the sponsor on a timetable to go and deploy investor capital, which forces a sponsor to go find deals even when in a potential market those deals might not be there. That is the downside of a fund is you have to be actively finding deals and deploying capital because you have a window in order to do it, right? After the deployment window, then you have a maturity window of when you're running the deal cycle and the project plan to make money and then ultimately to dispose of the assets and then to liquidate the fund. Um, but that's something to keep in mind is you will have to deploy the capital that you use. So if you raise $50 million, congratulations. You have another problem now. You got to go find 50 million. You got to go find deals to put that $50 million in because you are on a shot clock to do it.
And that is why it matters that you have the proper structure in place.
Correct. All of these things have to be thought out. All of these things have to be structured. Yep, and drafted properly, and they can be drafted in so many different ways. And again, it's all specific to what that particular sponsor, their strategy is, their business plan is, um, and all of those things. And that's why great counsel is important because these are things that you can't just, check of the box kind of thing. These are things you have to really think about.
Excellent. Well, you've worked with sponsors at a lot of different stages. Can you share an example of a situation where starting a fund made sense and also one where it probably didn't?
Yeah, great question. I have a lot of clients that have multi billions of dollars of AUM and have never done a fund, and they only do syndications because that's what works for them. There's no requirement to go do a fund. I know a fund sounds great and all, and there's a lot of hype in the market about having a fund versus a syndication and looking like you're more of a big deal because you have this fund. That's not the case. Um, if you've been successful doing syndications and successful raising money doing them, that might be the best business model for your business. Um, I if you know, are in an asset class where it makes sense to raise capital beforehand to go deploy it because you expect that there's gonna be, um, a window of opportunity coming up. Maybe a fund is something to consider. That is actually a lot of what's happening right now in the market. There is a window opportunity in the multifamily space that we are seeing.
Okay.
Um, and
Okay.
there's a bunch of sponsors that will agree with me on this, and there's some that might not. Um, but there appears to be a window opening of of where there's going to be great buying opportunities. And we're already seeing them. That might be a great time to raise a fund, which would be now, right? Like if you know this window of opportunity is coming in a year to 2 years, and if you have $50 million to go and take advantage of all the great deals, then you are going to do very, very well for yourself and for your investors. A fund makes sense to do that because that window of opportunity is not here yet, but you will need capital when it will arrive. So raising capital now to go take advantage of that a year from now or 2 years from now, that is something a fund is very powerful for. Um, if you have a deal lined up today that's a great deal and you want to go buy it, you're not setting up a fund. You need to go do a syndication. That's what makes the most sense. Or if you have great deal flow already, you don't maybe need a fund because you have a great deal flow. You have a great investor base. Every time you send them a deal, it gets funded. You don't really need a fund, I think. So again, depends on your situation.
Yeah, and I think, I think this is true in my city. I think it's true in many cities right now because of 2020. There is an opportunity. There's a lot of commercial space that's coming available, and it's coming up right really, really soon. Leases are expiring, and is that an example of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think commercial is a great example as well, right? It's the same thing. I would look at it the same way, right? If you have a business where it's more of a programmatic offering that you have in a business that's more like, I'm gonna go develop, I want to go develop 6 new shopping centers every year because I'm really good at developing shopping centers and leasing them up. And I know I can do it. And I've done 15, 20 of them already, which I have a client that's done like about 30 of them. A fund makes sense because I know exactly how much I need to raise, or not exactly, but close enough to go and develop 6 shopping centers next year. Why am I raising capital on a deal by deal basis to go develop those 6 shopping centers when I already know I have the deal flow to go and do them? I already have the team and systems in place. If I have money up front, if I have money lined up, I can go do those 6 deals, do them quicker and do them better. A fund makes sense because in that situation, you already kind of know, what you're going to be doing and how you're going to be deploying that capital. It also reduces that disadvantage that I mentioned, which is the deployment period. To go deploy that capital, you already figured that part out because you already have this business in place. That's what a fund is for. It's not, hey, I'm gonna go and create a fund because well, I don't really know what kind of deals I want to buy, so I'm just gonna go try raising $10 million, then I'll figure it out. Bad idea.
Where do sponsors go wrong when they try to transition from syndication into running a fund?
Yeah, I mean, they think that the capital raising is the same as a syndication, and it's not. It's a different conversation because you can't present them with a deal. Um, so it kind of goes back to everything we always talk about, which is with the fund, even more so than a syndication, you need to have a track record and credibility. Um, because you can't point to a deal that day that the investors are going to be investing in. So they are genuinely at that point, they are just investing in you and your ability to do great things. So that's what you have to present. So capital raising conversations are much different.
Thank you. That is it for today's episode of the Capital Stack Show, Real Estate Syndications and Funds. For more information or to connect with Shams, visit www.cre.law. And thanks for listening. Remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe to the show so you catch every episode. Thank you, Shams.
Thanks so much, Leanne.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.